Prime Minister Theresa May made a last-ditch effort today to convince rebel lawmakers to back a Brexit divorce deal, warning them that Britain's exit from the EU is now in peril from politicians seeking to thwart it.
The fate of the United Kingdom's March 29 exit from the EU is deeply uncertain, as Parliament is likely to reject May's deal on Tuesday evening, opening up outcomes ranging from a disorderly divorce to reversing Brexit altogether. May used a speech at a China factory in the Leave-supporting city of Stoke-on-Trent in central England to say that lawmakers blocking Brexit altogether was now a more likely outcome than Britain leaving without a deal.
There are some in Westminster who would wish to delay or even stop Brexit and who will use every device available to them to do so.
Britain's Prime Minister made a desperate last-ditch attempt to convince rebel lawmakers to get her divorce deal through Parliament on Monday. There are less than 48 hours to go until MPs vote on Theresa May's proposal. And in front of a group of factory workers in the Leave-supporting city of Stoke-on-Trent, May stressed that Britain's exit from the EU is now in peril from politicians seeking to thwart it.
It's now my judgment that the more likely outcome is a paralysis in Parliament that risks there being no Brexit.
May warned lawmakers on Sunday of the failure to deliver Brexit. Her ministers said reversing the outcome of the 2016 referendum could lead to a rise in far-right populism. All the signs point to Parliament voting down May's deal on Tuesday. And if it's a no, the door's then open to a last-minute deal, a disorderly exit, a new referendum, or even the option of reversing Brexit altogether.
What if we found ourselves in a situation where Parliament tried to take the UK out of the EU in opposition to a Remain vote? People's faith in the democratic process and their politicians would suffer catastrophic harm.
Some small comfort for May. The EU's written a letter setting out assurances about the so-called Northern Ireland backstop, the most contentious term of the deal. It's an insurance policy to prevent the return of border controls between the British province of Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic, an EU member. While Brussels has repeatedly said that the deal itself cannot be renegotiated, the letter stresses that the backstop is not the EU's preferred solution to avoiding a hard border. But with May's deal facing opposition from all sides, this letter's unlikely to change the fundamental outcome of the vote. And the UK will continue to battle the deepest crisis in British politics for at least half a century.
Let's now bring in foreign policy analyst Sanusha Naidu via Skype from Durban. Sanusha, good evening and thank you so much for joining us on The Globe. Now, we've seen Prime Minister Theresa May urging MPs to deliver Brexit by backing her deal. She's called for MPs not to let the British people down. What's your take on this?
Good evening. I think essentially what she needs is that she needs this deal to go through in a very smooth way. As up until now, she's had a serious upward battle because of the fact that she's been in a context and a conflictual relationship with her party, but also with the opposition. So she's banking on the fact that tomorrow parliamentarians will at least support the Brexit process going forward, because they have until March 29th to actually see that process come to some kind of structural implementation. And at this point in time, it's still very much up in the air because she's not certain that MPs are going to vote for this Brexit deal to go through. And of course, as was mentioned in the insert, you've got also the challenges of the backstop, because remember, it's not the UK that's negotiating this deal. It's actually the British government that's negotiating this deal, and it will have implications in terms of the fact that it won't be a clean break if indeed there's a lot of uncertainty around it. And the backstop measure that was mentioned in the insert plays a critical role because it still keeps the Irish Republic, Northern Ireland, and in particular in particular that country within the EU's customs union, free trade agreement area, and that poses challenges again for Britain in doing business with its partners within the United Kingdom.
Now, Sanusha, in that very insert, she mentioned the fact that rejecting the deal and lending to a no-deal Brexit could even pave the way for a breakup of the United Kingdom. Do you think this is even a possibility?
Well, like I've mentioned, the fact of the matter is that there's the critical juncture in all of this is if you don't have a deal tomorrow, if the MPs in Parliament, in the House of Commons and in the Parliament decide that they don't want to go through with this process or refer back to maybe having another referendum or whatever their intervention is, the reality on the ground is that the UK could very well become fragmented. It could break up, and this goes back to the point about the backstop measure. Because in this context of what is being negotiated, it is actually more British exit out of the EU in terms of Article 50, and it's not necessarily applies to all of the members that make up the United Kingdom, Ireland, Scotland, and so forth. And so what this does for the Prime Minister, and in terms of what does this mean for the sovereignty and the whole question of the United Kingdom's balance of power and its core, is that you could end up in a situation where Ireland is still within the EU. It's still getting benefits out of the negotiated processes around trade, etc. But it also means that if a breakup happens, you're going to see the British lose a lot of its financial assets and also lose its financial markets, and that could be moved to Ireland, which, if you think about it, is already happening, particularly in the context of movement of trade of people, movement in goods, and so forth, and of course transactional issues with regard to the border. So, in a sense, Britain could end up sitting in a much dire set of consequences than originally it had anticipated 2 years ago, when the whole Brexit thing took root, and the idea was that we are going to exit the Brexit under Article 50, but you haven't resolved the technical issues that can have serious implications for your trade. So you could be ending up doing trade with Ireland. Britain could be ending up doing trade with Ireland based on a EU context. And of course, it forces the British economy and the British policymakers to say, well, we'll have to basically abide by the rules because Ireland is still a member of the EU.
Now, Sanusha, with regards to the EU having stated that they're not open to renegotiate, the Brits, in terms of the Brits, what are the best interests of the country in this deal?
Well, at the moment, I think the Brits seem to be very, very uncertain. They're ambivalent. There's two camps rather. One that's suggesting that we don't want this deal because this deal will take place. And of course, there is the implication, even if the deal takes place, that we have to think about what happens with the backstop regarding Ireland. The second thing is whether or not they can, if they cannot reach any consensus tomorrow with the voting around the exit from the EU, then they have 14 days to come up with a new plan. And within that 14 days, coming up with a new plan has to be one that is acceptable to all political parties. Already we know that there's a fragility in the British political landscape because Theresa May and her Conservative Party, and of course Corbyn and the Labour Party, etc., particularly the Conservative Party, they have a coalition with the Conservative Party from Ireland. And that party now is not happy with this kind of arrangement. So what is the best way forward? I'm not sure. Whether they renegotiate this, whether they go back and come up with a new plan or a plan that perhaps satisfies the EU in a more amicable way. But again, there's also talk that the British government may be thinking of another referendum. Again, that may actually cause different dynamics. And then, of course, there's the no confidence vote in Theresa May as Prime Minister, which will then have to be also put into the factor. So what was something that they thought was going to be a smooth, easy withdrawal out of the EU is becoming a nightmare and headache in a policy space for the British government.
Now, Sanusha, let's speak about the implications of the Brexit deal on South Africa as one of the big trading partners with the United Kingdom.
Well, I think when you looked at Theresa May's visit last year to to 3 African countries, and South Africa was one of those countries. What she was really doing was to actually map out a trade relationship with South Africa. Now, South Africa and the EU do have very big and very strategic partnerships in terms of trade. But I think that when it comes to the kinds of dynamics, the British economy has also an important footprint in the South African economy, and of course in terms of two-way trade. So I think what we'll have to start doing is that what happens with Brexit should not necessarily become something that impacts negatively on South Africa or any other trading partner in Africa. What's going to happen is that the British government will have to go back to bilateral trade agreements and try and navigate that. So it's not going to be a trade agreement that conforms to the regimes and the rules of trade and all of the protocols as set out in the EU. If I'm not mistaken, and I stand corrected on this, I don't think that always applied in the case of South Africa and Britain, because Britain kind of had, in my opinion, it wasn't a full integration into the EU. It was really more of a managed integration. So you still had the pound. You didn't see the euro being a currency that's been used in the financial markets of the British economy and so forth. So I think on that level there was still a certain level of autonomy between the two sides on trade. But now it means that she has to find trade partners outside of the EU and consolidate those trading partners. And that's what I think the messaging was. Because if you listen to her at the Cape Town Press Club, it was all about how do we restructure and re-energize a trade relationship based on a bilateral engagement.
How should Prime Minister Theresa May work around including the MPs from, the difficulty that she's facing with regards to the vote that is expected to take place tomorrow evening? What route should she take to be more inclusive and ensure that everyone is happy with the Brexit deal?
I think Theresa May in the last several months has figured it out that she's not in the best position to try and play peace broker, mediator, negotiator. I think she is actually in many ways she's at the center of the controversy. She's at the center of the cloud, and so I think it's going to be a very difficult task if she's seeking to try and win over the MPs through some kind of maybe massaging off on the agreement, mellowing it out in certain ways, trying to find some kind of common ground. Because right now there seems to be a lot of aggression in that parliament against Theresa May. And of course, I think this is also the opportune moment for opposition parties like the Labour movement, like the Labour Party under Corbyn, to say that we're going to strike while this is hot. And maybe this is the recipe that she has to not only talk about Brexit, but also try and fight for the survival of her party and her prime ministership. Because one of the more direct implications of this is that they don't come to an agreement tomorrow, or if they basically shoot down her proposal on the Brexit process, then the British government is sitting in a quagmire, and they're sitting in a very delicate position, because you can then call for early elections, and that's going to be critical as well for her term in office. So I think she's not basically the right person to be negotiating these spaces, because she is at the center of the controversy, and there's been a lot of attack against her if you look at the parliament. If there is to be some kind of way forward, I think it has to come from perhaps people who are less seen as aggressive or less seen as part of the problem and who can negotiate this. But right now, I think it's just two types of outcomes that are being identified. One, that she wins by a very small margin and gets the Brexit process approved and ratified through Parliament, and then of course she's able to then take that through to March 29th, when the whole process has to be in the final context of finalization. Or she's going to be sitting there and she's going to basically have to deal with a no vote, which then means all the other trifectas, the question of 14 days, finding a new Brexit compact. If that doesn't work, then you're going to see perhaps a new election and a vote of no confidence. And of course, she has been defeated in Parliament previously. recently, last year, especially around the Brexit. So whether she's going to negotiate it, I don't think that's the best option. I think perhaps what needs to be done is members of a party who probably have better traction try to prevail on the other MPs to say, don't do this. We've come this far. Let this thing go in terms of its logical progression. Unfortunately, I think that it's going to be a very tightly wound race tomorrow.
Sanusha, thank you so much for joining us. We'll leave it there for now. And